Greetings, fellow dreamers. This tale is filled with love, secrets, and a twist you'll never forget. Step into the tale. The Manhattan skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the velvet darkness, each light a testament to ambition, power, and the relentless hunger for more. Sebastian Vale stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, 32 floors above the chaos, watching the city pulse beneath him like a living organism he had learned to control. At 32, he commanded an empire. Vale Industries sprawled across continents, its tendrils reaching into technology, real estate, pharmaceutical research. $50 billion in net worth, and yet the number meant nothing compared to the control it represented. His reflection in the glass showed sharp gray eyes that had witnessed too much betrayal, a jaw set in permanent suspicion, and shoulders that carried the weight of a world where trust was the most dangerous commodity. The penthouse reflected its owner with brutal honesty. Glass and steel dominated every surface, creating angles that felt deliberate, cold, uninviting. No photographs softened the walls. No plants breathed life into the corners. Even the art was abstract, devoid of human warmth, chosen by a decorator who understood that Sebastian Vale wanted a fortress, not a home. He had learned the lesson early. 12 years old, standing in the doorway of his childhood bedroom, listening to his mother's heels click against marble as she walked away forever. She had chosen his father's business rival, chosen wealth and passion over the son who had believed her bedtime stories about unconditional love. His father, Robert Vale, had turned bitter after that, his grief curdling into suspicion that he fed to Sebastian like poison disguised as wisdom. Everyone has a price, Sebastian. Everyone will betray you when the offer is right. The only question is whether you see it coming. The words had shaped him, hardened him, turned him into something that could not be hurt because it refused to feel. The sound of a vacuum cleaner hummed from the far end of the penthouse, pulling Sebastian from his thoughts. He glanced at his watch. 7:15. Grace Morgan was finishing her evening shift, as reliable as the sunrise, as unobtrusive as a shadow. She had worked for him for 2 years, head of housekeeping for the building, though she personally handled his penthouse. 26 years old, with auburn hair that caught the light when she moved, and warm brown eyes that seemed incapable of the calculating coldness he saw in everyone else. She possessed a quiet beauty that had nothing to do with the aggressive perfection of the women in his world. Grace glowed from somewhere deeper, somewhere he had forgotten existed. What intrigued Sebastian most was her indifference. She never asked for anything beyond her paycheck, never lingered to chat, never seemed impressed by the wealth that surrounded her. She cleaned with meticulous care, not from fear but from genuine pride in her work. And then she disappeared back into whatever life she led in the world below. He had made inquiries, of course. Grace Morgan, father with stage 4 cancer, medical bills that would crush most families, working 3 jobs to keep him comfortable in his final months. She lived in a studio apartment in Queens, took night classes in literature at the community college, and had exactly $743 in her savings account. She should have been desperate. She should have been angling for more money, special treatment, anything. But Grace simply did her job and left, humming softly to herself, occasionally leaving small touches that made his sterile penthouse feel almost human. Fresh flowers in a vase on the kitchen counter, books rearranged by color on his shelves, the scent of lavender in the air. Sebastian found himself watching her more than he cared to admit. The intercom buzzed, shattering his observation. His assistant's voice crackled through. "Mr. Vale, Victoria Sterling is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Sebastian's jaw tightened. Victoria Sterling. The name alone sent ice through his veins, though once it had ignited something far more dangerous. 3 years since she had walked out of his life in disgrace, and now she was back. Send her up. He positioned himself behind his desk, the power seat, the position of control. When Victoria swept into the room 5 minutes later, she looked exactly as he remembered. Tall, blonde, devastating in a crimson dress that clung to every curve like a second skin. Her perfume reached him before she did, expensive and intoxicating, chosen to trigger memories of tangled sheets and whispered promises. "Sebastian, darling," her voice was silk over steel. "You look absolutely magnificent. Success suits you." He studied her with the same intensity he brought to hostile negotiations. Victoria had been his fiancée once, his partner in building the empire. Until he discovered she had been selling his secrets to competitors, feeding them information about acquisitions, mergers, strategies. The betrayal had nearly destroyed a $2 billion deal and cost him months of careful planning. He had ended it with cold precision, cutting her out of his life without a second thought. Or so he had told himself during the nights when her absence felt like a missing limb. "What do you want, Victoria?" She laughed, settling into the leather chair across from him with the confidence of someone who knew she still affected him. "I want us, Sebastian. I made mistakes. Terrible, foolish mistakes. But I've spent 3 years regretting them. 3 years becoming the woman who deserves to stand beside you. You sold me out for $5 million and a promotion at Sterling Tech. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. A choice I've paid for every day since." Her blue eyes shimmered with what might have been real tears. "I was young, stupid, trying to prove I could succeed on my own. But I realize now that we were stronger together. Give me another chance, Sebastian. Let me prove I can be the partner you deserve." Sebastian leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Victoria understood his world in ways few people did. She could be an asset, a trophy wife who enhanced his image and opened doors. But trust, once shattered, could never be fully repaired. He needed to be certain of her motivations before he even considered letting her back into his orbit. As Victoria continued her pitch, painting pictures of the power couple they could become, Sebastian's mind was already working, calculating, planning. An idea began to form, cold and methodical, a test that would reveal the true nature of everyone in his life. He would pretend to be vulnerable, drunk, stripped of his usual defenses. And he would watch what they did when they thought he couldn't see clearly. It was cruel, manipulative, exactly the kind of thing his father would have approved of. But Sebastian had long ago accepted that cruelty was just another tool for survival. After Victoria left with promises of dinner and second chances, Sebastian walked through his penthouse. Grace was in his study, carefully dusting his collection of rare first editions. She handled each book with reverence, as though she understood their value had nothing to do with the price tags. He had decided. He would test them all. Victoria first, then his business associates, and finally Grace. Because despite her apparent goodness, Sebastian knew everyone had a price. He just needed to discover hers. Grace looked up as he entered, her brown eyes steady and warm. "Good evening, Mr. Vale. I'm almost finished. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Miss Morgan." She returned to her work, and Sebastian watched the way she moved, graceful and unhurried, completely at ease in his presence. Most people tensed when he entered a room. Grace simply continued humming softly, something classical he couldn't quite place. "Do you enjoy your work, Miss Morgan?" The question seemed to surprise her. She paused, considered, then smiled. "I do, actually. There's something satisfying about taking care of beautiful things, making spaces feel peaceful. It might seem simple to some people, but I think there's dignity in any work done well. An interesting philosophy. My father taught me that. He was a carpenter before he got sick. He used to say that you could tell everything about a person by how they treated the things and people they had power over." The comment landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Sebastian felt something shift in his chest, an uncomfortable sensation he quickly suppressed. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He is." Grace's smile turned sad. "He doesn't have much time left, but he's still the wisest person I know." She finished with the books and gathered her supplies. "Have a good evening, Mr. Vale." As she walked toward the door, Sebastian made his decision. The test would begin tomorrow night. He would discover who these people really were when they thought he was too drunk to remember, and when he knew the truth, he would act accordingly. Because in Sebastian Vale's world, there was no room for deception, betrayal, or false loyalty. What he didn't know was that his cruel test would reveal truths about himself he had spent a lifetime trying to bury. Grace paused at the door, glancing back. "Mr. Vale, I noticed you haven't been eating the meals the chef prepares. If you'd like, I could make something simple tomorrow. My father always said the best food comes from someone who cares whether you enjoy it." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving Sebastian alone in his glass fortress, wondering why a simple offer of kindness felt more dangerous than any business negotiation he had ever faced. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place where deals were made and souls were sold. all dim lighting and leather booths that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sebastian sat across from Victoria, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand that he had barely touched while she watched him with predatory patience. He had spent the afternoon perfecting his performance. Loosened tie, hair slightly disheveled, words slurred just enough to seem intoxicated without being sloppy. Victoria couldn't know that the whiskey in his glass was mostly water, that every stumble was calculated, every vulnerable moment a trap waiting to spring. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered," he said, letting his gaze linger on her face with the unfocused intensity of someone 3 drinks past sensible. "I forgot how good we were together." Victoria's smile sharpened. She leaned forward, her hand covering his on the table. "We were perfect together, Sebastian. We could be again. You know you can trust me now. I've learned my lesson. Trust." He laughed, bitter and raw. "That's the problem, isn't it? I don't trust anyone anymore. Not after you. Not after my mother. Everyone leaves. Everyone betrays. Not me. Not this time." Her fingers traced patterns on his wrist. "Let me prove it to you. Let me back into your life. Into your business. We could build something extraordinary together." Sebastian let his head drop slightly, as though the alcohol was pulling him under. "I don't know. Everything's so complicated. The Meridian acquisition, the board meeting next week. Sometimes I think about just walking away from all of it." He watched her eyes flicker with interest. The Meridian acquisition was worth $3 billion and highly confidential. If she was still the woman who had betrayed him before, she wouldn't be able to resist the bait. "You're just tired, darling." Victoria's voice was honey-sweet poison. "Why don't you sign these papers I brought? Just a simple authorization giving me access to help manage some of your personal accounts. That way I can take some of the burden off your shoulders. You trust me, don't you?" There it was. The truth beneath the beautiful lie. Sebastian let his hand hover over the papers, watched hope bloom in Victoria's eyes. Then he set down his glass and looked at her with complete, cold sobriety. "I trust you exactly as much as you deserve, Victoria." Which is not at all. Her face drained of color. "Sebastian, I don't understand. I'm completely sober. I have been all evening, and you just proved that you haven't changed at all. You're still the same woman who sold me out for money and ambition." Victoria's shock hardened into fury. "You manipulative bastard. This was all a test? One you failed spectacularly. Get out." She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "You know what your problem is, Sebastian? You're so obsessed with finding betrayal that you create it. You push everyone away before they can get close enough to hurt you. You're going to die alone in that glass tower of yours, and you'll deserve every second of it." Her words struck deeper than he wanted to admit, but Sebastian's expression remained carved from ice. "Goodbye, Victoria. Don't contact me again." After she stormed out, Sebastian sat alone in the booth, staring at the untouched whiskey. Victoria's final words echoed in his mind, mixing with his father's lessons about trust and his mother's departure. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. But then he remembered the business associates he had tested over the past 2 days. Every single one had tried to take advantage when they thought he was vulnerable. His CFO had attempted to get him to approve fraudulent expenses. His head of acquisitions had tried to extract insider information. His lawyer had suggested changes to his will that would benefit the firm enormously. Everyone had a price. Everyone would betray you. Except he hadn't tested Grace yet. The thought of her filled him with something he couldn't quite name. Anticipation mixed with dread. He wanted to prove his father right, to confirm that everyone was corruptible. But some small, buried part of him hoped Grace would be different. He returned to his penthouse near midnight, his mind churning with dark thoughts. Grace was still there, working late again. She looked up from where she was organizing his home office, concern flickering across her face. "Mr. Vale, are you all right? You look exhausted. Long day." He moved to the bar, poured himself a real drink this time. "Why are you still here, Miss Morgan?" "Your shift ended hours ago. I'm reorganizing your filing system. The previous method wasn't efficient. I hope you don't mind that I stayed late to finish." She hesitated. "I won't charge overtime. I just wanted to do it right." Of course she wouldn't charge overtime. Grace never asked for anything. Sebastian drank, feeling the whiskey burn down his throat. Tomorrow night he would test her. He would get genuinely drunk, leave himself completely vulnerable, and see what she did. Part of him dreaded discovering that she was just like everyone else, Another part dreaded discovering that she wasn't, because that would mean his entire worldview was built on sand. "Miss Morgan, would you mind working late tomorrow evening? I have some business associates coming over, and I'd like the penthouse to be perfect." "Of course, Mr. Vale." She finished her work and gathered her things. As she headed for the door, she paused. "Mr. Vale, I know it's not my place, but you seem troubled. My father used to say that carrying everything alone doesn't make you strong. It just makes you lonely." Before he could respond, she was gone. Sebastian stood in his empty penthouse, surrounded by steel and glass, and the weight of too many betrayals. Grace's words settled over him like snow, soft and persistent. Lonely. Yes, he was lonely, but loneliness was safer than trust. The next evening arrived with the weight of an execution. Sebastian prepared carefully for his final test. He invited no business associates. This time, it would just be him and Grace, and the truth would reveal itself in the small hours of the night when people's real nature emerged. He started drinking early, real alcohol this time. He needed to be genuinely impaired, genuinely vulnerable. If Grace was going to reveal her true colors, she needed to believe he was completely at her mercy. By the time Grace arrived for her late shift at 8 o'clock, Sebastian was leaning against the bar, his vision starting to blur at the edges. He had drunk more than he intended, the alcohol loosening something inside him that had been locked away for years. "Mr. Vale?" Grace's voice was sharp with concern. She set down her cleaning supplies and hurried to his side. "Are you okay? How much have you had to drink?" "Enough." His words slurred together. "Enough to forget. That's the point, isn't it? To forget that everyone you trust will hurt you eventually." Grace's hand was gentle on his arm. "Let's get you to the couch. You shouldn't be standing like this." He let her guide him across the room, noting how carefully she supported his weight without making him feel weak. She settled him on the leather sofa, then disappeared. Sebastian closed his eyes, the room spinning slightly. This was it, the test. She was alone in his penthouse with a drunk billionaire. His wallet was on the bar. His safe was in the bedroom, the combination written in the notebook on his desk because he had been too drunk to remember it. She could take anything. She could call the tabloids. She could do 1,000 things that would hurt him. Grace returned with a glass of water and a blanket. "Drink this. All of it." Sebastian obeyed, watching her through half-closed eyes as she moved around the penthouse. She was checking doors, he realized, making sure they were locked. She turned off unnecessary lights. She wasn't searching for valuables. She was making him safe. "You should call someone," Grace said quietly, sitting on the coffee table across from him. "A friend, family, someone who can stay with you tonight." No one to call. The alcohol had stripped away his usual defenses. No friends, no family worth mentioning, just business associates who want something from me and ex-lovers who betrayed me. Grace's eyes filled with something that looked like genuine sadness. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "It's the truth. Everyone has a price, Miss Morgan. My father taught me that. My mother proved it when she left. Victoria proved it when she sold my secrets. Everyone I've tested this week proved it." He looked at her directly. "What's your price?" "Everyone has one." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "You're right that everyone has needs, Mr. Vale. I need money for my father's care. I need to finish my education. I need 1,000 things I can't afford. But needing something and compromising your integrity to get it are two different choices." Pretty words. But when you're desperate enough, integrity becomes a luxury. "No." Grace's voice held steel beneath the gentleness. "Integrity is all some of us have. When everything else is taken from you, the one thing that remains is who you choose to be when no one's watching." Sebastian felt something crack inside his chest. "You're alone with a drunk billionaire. I'm completely vulnerable. You could take anything from this penthouse and I'd be too impaired to stop you or remember clearly. Why haven't you?" Grace stood, moved to the window, and looked out at the city lights. When she turned back, there were tears in her eyes. "Because that's not who I am. Because my father raised me to believe that how you treat people when they're helpless says everything about your character. And because you're not a bank account or a business opportunity to me, Mr. Vale, you're a human being who's clearly in pain, And I don't take advantage of people in pain." The words hit Sebastian like a physical blow. He had spent years building walls, convinced that vulnerability was weakness and trust was suicide. But Grace stood in his penthouse, poor and desperate and surrounded by wealth she could easily steal, and chose kindness instead. "I don't understand you," he whispered. "I know." Grace moved closer, her voice gentle. "You've been hurt so badly that you've forgotten kindness exists. But it does, Mr. Vale. Not everyone is out to betray you." Sebastian felt the alcohol pulling him under, exhaustion and emotion combining into something overwhelming. "Stay," he heard himself say. "Please, just until I fall asleep. I don't want to be alone tonight." He expected her to leave, to make excuses, to reveal that her kindness had limits. Instead, Grace pulled a chair close to the sofa and sat down. "I'll stay. Close your eyes. You're safe." As Sebastian drifted toward unconsciousness, Grace's voice followed him into the dark, soft and steady. She was humming something he recognized from childhood, a lullaby his mother had sung before she learned that love had a price tag. When he woke hours later, dawn was breaking over Manhattan. Grace was still there, asleep in the chair, her neck bent at an uncomfortable angle. His wallet was on the table beside him, untouched. A note lay next to it in her handwriting. "You were restless. I stayed to make sure you were okay. I made coffee. It's in the kitchen. I hope you feel better today." "Grace?" Sebastian sat up slowly, his head pounding. He looked at the woman sleeping in the chair, this impossible person who had passed his test without even knowing she was being tested. She had stayed not for money or advantage, but simply because he had asked her to, because he was hurting, and she couldn't walk away from someone in pain. For the first time in 20 years, Sebastian Vale felt something besides suspicion and calculation. He felt ashamed. Grace woke to sunlight, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the disconcerting realization that she had fallen asleep in Sebastian Vale's penthouse. She jerked upright, her neck protesting the awkward angle, and found him watching her from the sofa with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Vale. I didn't mean to fall asleep. I should have left once you were settled." She stood quickly, smoothing her uniform. "That was completely unprofessional. You stayed because I asked you to." His voice was rough from alcohol and sleep. "There's nothing to apologize for." Grace gathered her things, acutely aware of how intimate this felt, being alone with him in the early morning light. She had seen him at his most vulnerable last night, stripped of the cold armor he wore like a second skin. Part of her wanted to check if he was okay, but the wall was already rebuilding between them. "There's coffee in the kitchen," she said quietly, "and I left some aspirin on the counter. For the headache." "Miss Morgan." He stood, moved closer. "Why did you stay?" The question hung between them, weighted with something neither of them wanted to name. Grace met his gaze steadily. "Because you asked me to. Because everyone deserves compassion when they're hurting. Because it was the right thing to do." "Even though I'm just your employer? Even though I was testing you?" The words hit her like cold water. Grace felt her stomach drop. "Testing me?" Sebastian had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I've been testing everyone in my life. Getting drunk, making myself vulnerable, seeing who would take advantage. Victoria tried to steal from me. My business associates tried to manipulate me. I expected you to do the same." The betrayal of it stole her breath. Grace had stayed out of genuine concern, had worried about him all night, and it had been nothing but a cruel experiment. She felt something inside her crack. The same feeling she got when her father's test results came back worse than expected, when hope turned to ash. "I see." Her voice was steady despite the hurt flooding through her. "And did I pass your test, Mr. Vale? Did I perform my role as the virtuous poor girl adequately? Miss Morgan, that's not what I meant. Isn't it?" She grabbed her bag, needing to leave before he saw how much his words had wounded her. "You set up an elaborate trap to prove that everyone is corrupt. Congratulations. You've confirmed that not everyone is like the people who hurt you. I hope that brings you comfort in your fortress. Grace, please." It was the first time he had used her first name. The sound of it stopped her at the door. "I was wrong," Sebastian continued, his voice raw. "About you. About what I'd find. You didn't take anything. You didn't try to manipulate me. You just stayed because I needed someone, and I don't know how to process that." Grace turned to face him. In the morning light, stripped of his usual polish, Sebastian looked younger, more lost. She saw the scared boy beneath the billionaire, the one whose mother had abandoned him, whose father had taught him that love was a transaction. "You want to know what the saddest part is?" Grace said softly. "You were so busy testing me that you never considered I might have stayed simply because I care. Not about your money or your power, about you as a person. But you can't accept that, can you? Because in your world, kindness always has a price tag." She left before he could respond, walking out into the bright morning with tears burning behind her eyes. She had been foolish to think someone like Sebastian Vale could see her as anything more than staff, more than a test subject for his cynical experiments. The next 2 weeks passed in careful distance. Grace continued her work, but she arrived after Sebastian left for the office and finished before he returned. She left no more small touches, no flowers, no rearranged books. The penthouse remained perfect and sterile, exactly as cold as its owner wanted it. Sebastian felt her absence like a missing piece of himself he hadn't known existed. He found himself looking for signs of her presence, the scent of lavender, the sound of her humming, anything. But Grace had withdrawn completely, leaving only professional competence in her wake. He tried to focus on work, burying himself in the Meridian acquisition and board meetings. But his mind kept drifting back to that morning, to the hurt in Grace's eyes when she realized he had been testing her. He had treated her like everyone else in his life, and in doing so, had proven her point. He created the betrayals he feared by refusing to trust anyone enough to prove him wrong. His father's voice echoed in his head, warning him that sentiment was weakness. But for the first time in his life, Sebastian wondered if his father had been wrong. If the real weakness was being too afraid to trust, too scarred to reach for connection even when it was offered freely. 3 weeks after that morning, Sebastian's assistant buzzed him at the office with unexpected news. "Mr. Vale, there's a situation. Grace Morgan hasn't shown up for her shifts in 3 days. The building manager wanted to know if you'd like to assign someone else to handle the penthouse." Sebastian felt ice flood his veins. Grace was nothing if not reliable. Something was wrong. "Find her," he ordered, his voice sharp with concern he didn't bother hiding. "Get me her address. Now." 20 minutes later, he was in his car, breaking traffic laws to reach Queens. Grace's apartment building was exactly what he expected. Run down but clean. The kind of place where people worked 3 jobs just to survive. He took the stairs 2 at a time to her 4th-floor studio. No one answered his knock. Sebastian was about to break down the door when an elderly neighbor emerged from the apartment across the hall. "If you're looking for Grace, she's at Metropolitan Hospital. Her father took a turn for the worse 3 days ago. Poor girl's been there ever since." Sebastian drove to the hospital with his heart hammering against his ribs. He found Grace in the ICU waiting room, curled in a plastic chair that had clearly become her bed. She looked exhausted, her auburn hair tangled, her eyes red from crying. She wore the same clothes she'd had on days ago. When she saw him, confusion flickered across her face. "Mr. Vale, what are you doing here? You disappeared." "I was worried." He sat beside her, ignoring the other people in the waiting room. "How's your father?" Grace's composure crumbled. "He's dying. They said days, maybe hours. I've been trying to make him comfortable, but the insurance won't cover the palliative care he needs. I've used all my savings, taken out loans, but it's not enough." "How much do you need?" She laughed, bitter and broken. "More than I'll ever have. 200,000 for the treatment that might give him another 6 months. But it doesn't matter. I can't afford it, and I've made peace with that. I just want him to die without pain." Sebastian pulled out his phone. "Consider it done." Grace grabbed his wrist. "No, absolutely not. I won't take your charity, Mr. Vale. I'm not one of your test subjects you can buy or manipulate. This isn't charity or manipulation. Grace, this is me trying to do something good for someone who showed me what goodness looks like." He met her eyes. "Please let me help. Not because you owe me anything, but because your father deserves better and so do you." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why do you care?" Sebastian took her hand, the gesture feeling both foreign and necessary. "Because you stayed when I asked you to. Because you didn't take advantage when you could have. Because you made me question everything I believed about human nature. Because somewhere in the last few weeks, you became important to me. And I'm terrified of what that means, but I can't ignore it anymore. Grace stared at him, tears streaming down her face. You hurt me. You treated me like an experiment. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Grace. I've spent my entire life building walls because I was too scared to risk being hurt again. But those walls kept out the pain and the possibility of anything good. You showed me that. Let me do this, please. After a long moment, Grace nodded. Okay, for my father. But after this, we're done. You've paid whatever debt you think you owe, and I'll find work somewhere else. That's not what I want. I don't care what you want, Mr. Vale. Her voice was steel wrapped in exhaustion. You can't play with people's hearts and expect them to trust you when it's convenient. Before Sebastian could respond, a doctor approached. Miss Morgan, your father is asking for you. Grace stood, wiped her tears, and disappeared through the ICU doors without looking back. Sebastian sat alone in the waiting room, his phone already dialing his assistant to arrange payment for every treatment, every comfort, everything that could give Grace's father peace in his final days. He had spent years convinced that money was power, that wealth could solve any problem. But watching Grace walk away from him, Sebastian realized some things couldn't be bought. Trust, once broken, had to be earned back piece by painful piece. And he had no idea if Grace would ever give him the chance. Hours later, Grace emerged from the ICU. Her eyes found Sebastian immediately, still sitting in the same chair, waiting. Something shifted in her expression. The doctor said the treatment starts tomorrow. They said my father will have the best care available. She sat beside him. The fight drained out of her. You really did it. I told you I would. They sat in silence, the hospital sounds washing over them. Finally, Grace spoke. My father wants to meet you. He says any man who would do this for a stranger deserves his gratitude. Sebastian followed her into the ICU, into the small room where Thomas Morgan lay connected to machines that beeped and hummed. Despite his illness, the old man's eyes were sharp, assessing. Mr. Vale. His voice was weak but firm. My daughter tells me you've been playing games with her heart. Dad, please. Grace's cheeks flushed. It's all right. Sebastian moved closer to the bed. He's right. I'm trying to do better. Thomas studied him for a long moment. Grace thinks everyone deserves compassion. I think some people need to earn it. You want my daughter's forgiveness. You're going to have to prove you're worth it. Money's easy. Character is hard. I understand, sir. Good. Thomas reached for Grace's hand. Baby girl, I know I taught you to see the good in people. But make sure he sees the good in himself first. A man who doesn't believe he deserves happiness will destroy it when he finds it. The words settled over Sebastian like a prophecy. As he left the hospital that night, Grace's father's warning echoing in his mind. He wondered if he was capable of becoming the man Grace deserved, or if he would destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him because he had forgotten how to believe in anything beyond his own cynicism. Back in his penthouse, Sebastian stood at the windows looking out at the city. Somewhere in Queens, Grace was probably returning to her empty apartment, exhausted and emotionally drained. He wanted to call her, to hear her voice, but he knew she needed space. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for what you did for my father. It means more than you'll ever know. But I meant what I said. After this, we need distance. You're my employer, and I can't forget that. Especially not now. Grace. Sebastian stared at the message, feeling something twist in his chest. He had spent his life pushing people away, and now that he wanted to pull someone close, she was the one walking away. The irony wasn't lost on him. What he didn't know was that at that exact moment, Victoria Sterling was sitting in her apartment, staring at photographs of Sebastian and Grace leaving the hospital together. She had paid a private investigator to follow Sebastian after their disastrous dinner, looking for leverage, for weakness, for anything she could exploit, and she had found it. Victoria smiled, cold and calculating. She had lost Sebastian once because she'd been careless. This time, she would take everything he valued and burn it to ash, starting with the little maid who had somehow captured his heart. The game was far from over. 2 months passed like a careful dance between wanting and restraint. Grace's father stabilized under the new treatment, gaining strength that gave him precious additional time. Sebastian paid for everything without hesitation, but he honored Grace's request for distance, communicating only through his assistant about practical matters. Except he couldn't stop thinking about her. He found excuses to work from home on days he knew she'd be there, positioning himself where he could catch glimpses of her moving through his penthouse. Grace remained professional, polite, and utterly closed off. But sometimes he'd catch her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, her brown eyes holding questions she refused to ask. The longing was driving him insane. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything shattered. Sebastian was in a video conference with the Tokyo office when his assistant burst in without knocking, her face pale. "Mr. Vale, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this immediately." She handed him a tablet. The headline blazed across the screen. "Billionaire's sick obsession. Sebastian Vale preys on vulnerable employee, buys dying father's cooperation." Sebastian's blood turned to ice as he read the article. It detailed his relationship with Grace with poisonous accuracy, twisting every genuine moment into something predatory and calculated. The piece claimed he had been grooming Grace for months, using her father's illness as leverage to force her into a relationship. Photos accompanied the story. Sebastian and Grace at the hospital leaving together. Images that looked intimate and damning. Quotes were attributed to anonymous sources close to the situation, painting Sebastian as a monster who exploited his employees' desperation. The article suggested that Grace was too afraid of losing her job and her father's treatment to refuse his advances. Every word was a lie built on a foundation of truth, and it would destroy them both. Who released this? Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet. The byline says Jennifer Martinez, but the story was fed to her by someone with access to private information. His assistant hesitated. "Mr. Vale, the board is already calling for an emergency meeting. The optics are catastrophic." Sebastian was already moving, grabbing his jacket. "Find out who did this. I want names, proof, everything, and get my lawyers on damage control immediately." But his first concern wasn't the business fallout. It was Grace. He found her in the service quarters, surrounded by other staff members who fell silent when he approached. Grace stood with her shoulders straight, her face carefully blank, but Sebastian could see the devastation beneath her composure. "Miss Morgan, we need to talk. Privately." "I don't think that's a good idea, Mr. Vale. As the article suggests, private conversations between us seem to cause problems." "Grace, please." The other staff members exchanged glances. Grace's friend Maria, another housekeeper, put a protective hand on her shoulder. "Maybe you should leave her alone, Mr. Vale. She's been through enough." "It's okay, Maria." Grace's voice was tired. "I'll talk to him." They went to an empty conference room. The moment the door closed, Sebastian saw Grace's mask crack. Tears streamed down her face, and she looked utterly broken. "They're saying terrible things about me, about us. My father saw the article. He's so upset he had to be sedated. People are calling me names, saying I'm a gold digger who used my dying father to seduce you." Her voice rose with each word. "My phone won't stop ringing. There are reporters outside my apartment. Someone threw garbage at me this morning." Sebastian moved toward her instinctively, but Grace held up a hand. "Don't. Please don't touch me right now, because if you do, I'll fall apart completely, and I can't afford to do that. I'm going to fix this. I'll release a statement, sue them for libel, make them retract every word. It doesn't matter. The damage is done. Even if they retract it, people will always wonder. They'll always think there's some truth to it." Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "I need to resign. It's the only way to stop this." "No." The word came out harder than Sebastian intended. "You are not sacrificing your job because someone decided to weaponize our connection." "What connection, Sebastian?" Grace's use of his first name felt significant. "You tested me like I was a lab rat. I stayed professional. You helped my father, which I'm grateful for. But that doesn't make this any less complicated. There is no us. There's an employer and an employee, and that's all there can be. That's not all this is, and you know it. What I know is that someone just destroyed my reputation to hurt you. What I know is that association with you has turned my life into a nightmare. What I know is that I can't keep doing this." Before Sebastian could respond, His phone rang. His head of security. "Mr. Vale, we've traced the leak. The photos and information came from Victoria Sterling. She's been surveilling you for months, waiting for an opportunity." Sebastian felt rage flood through him, cold and absolute. Victoria. Of course it was Victoria. She had found his weakness and gone for the throat. "Grace, I need to handle something." But this conversation isn't over. Yes, it is. Grace moved toward the door. "I'm resigning effective immediately. I'll send a formal letter. Please continue my father's treatment as promised. That's all I ask." "Grace, don't do this." She paused at the door, her back to him. "You wanted to know my price, remember? You wanted to find out what would make me compromise my integrity. Congratulations, Sebastian. You found it. My price is my father's life. But having a price doesn't mean I have to like what I paid for it." She left, and Sebastian stood alone in the conference room, understanding with terrible clarity that he had won his cruel test only to lose everything that mattered. He spent the next 3 hours in his office, systematically destroying Victoria Sterling's life. He called in every favor, leveraged every connection, used every tool in his considerable arsenal. By the time he was finished, Victoria's company had lost 3 major contracts. Her board was calling for her resignation, and criminal charges for corporate espionage were being filed. His lawyer called with an update. "Mr. Vale, Victoria Sterling is on the phone. She wants to negotiate." "Put her through." Victoria's voice was stripped of its usual polish. "Sebastian, please. You're ruining me. I'll retract everything, issue a public apology, whatever you want." "You went after Grace." Sebastian's voice could have cut glass. "You used her father's illness as a weapon. There is no negotiation, Victoria. You wanted to destroy me by hurting someone I care about. Now you get to understand what that feels like. I was angry. I made a mistake. But what you're doing is extreme, even for you. You haven't seen extreme yet. By the time I'm done, your name will be synonymous with betrayal in every boardroom in this city. You'll be lucky to get a job managing a coffee shop." He hung up before she could respond. The victory felt hollow. He had protected his empire, destroyed his enemy, and lost the one person who had made him believe he could be better than the monster his father had created. That evening, Sebastian stood in his penthouse staring at the city lights. Everything was exactly as it had been before Grace entered his life. Perfect, sterile, empty. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Mr. Vale, this is Thomas Morgan. Grace told me what happened. She won't answer my calls. I'm worried about her. She's staying with a friend, but she's not in a good place. I know my daughter said to stay away, but I'm asking you man to man. Don't give up on her. She's scared and hurt, but she cares about you. More than she wants to admit. A girl doesn't cry that hard over someone who doesn't matter. Thomas." Sebastian stared at the message, hope and guilt warring inside him. Grace's father was giving him permission to fight for her. But after everything he had put her through, did he have the right? His assistant buzzed. "Mr. Vale, Grace Morgan is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Sebastian's heart stopped. "Send her up." Grace arrived looking determined and devastated in equal measure. She thrust an envelope at him. "My resignation letter, and a request. I need you to stop my father's treatment." "What?" "Grace, no. I mean it." Her voice shook but held firm. "I can't accept anything else from you. It makes me complicit in this twisted dynamic. My father has had 2 good months. That's more than we expected. I need to end this before it destroys both of us completely." Sebastian took the envelope but didn't open it. "Your father's treatment has nothing to do with us. It's not conditional on anything. I helped because it was right, not because I wanted leverage over you." "Then why did you do it?" "Really?" Grace's eyes blazed with tears and fury. "You don't do anything without calculating the return on investment. What did you want from me, Sebastian? My gratitude? My body? My soul? I wanted you to look at me the way you did that night when I was drunk and you stayed anyway." The words tore out of him, raw and honest. "I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved that kindness. I wanted to believe I was capable of being more than my father's legacy of suspicion and betrayal." Grace stared at him, her breath coming fast. "You can't say things like that." "Why not?" "It's the truth. I'm in love with you, Grace. I have been since the night you passed a test you didn't know you were taking. Since you showed me that goodness exists without conditions. I love you. And I know I have no right to say it, no right to feel it. but I can't keep pretending I don't." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Grace's face crumpled, and suddenly she was crying, really crying, her whole body shaking with it. "You don't love me. You love the idea of me, the pure, kind maid who proved your worldview wrong. But I'm not some saint, Sebastian. I'm angry and resentful and so tired of being poor that sometimes I hate people like you just for existing. I stayed that night because it was right, but also because part of me wanted you to see me as more than staff. I wanted you to look at me the way you looked at Victoria, like I was worth wanting." She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you're the only one who's been tested? Every day I work in your home, surrounded by wealth I'll never have, cleaning up after someone who has everything while my father dies by inches. That's my test, and some days I fail it. Some days I resent you so much I can barely breathe. So don't put me on a pedestal, Sebastian. I'll only disappoint you when I fall off." Sebastian closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face. "I don't want a saint. I want you. Angry, resentful, complicated, real you. The woman who stayed because it was right, and because she wanted to. The woman who takes night classes and reads about Marie Curie and hums while she works. The woman who tells me hard truths and doesn't let me hide behind my money. We can't do this. The power imbalance alone makes it impossible. Then I'll fix it. You're right that you can't work for me anymore. Not if we're going to try this. But not because I'm firing you. Because I'm giving you a choice without the job hanging over it. Your father's treatment continues regardless. I'll set up a trust that ensures it. You don't work for me. We start over as equals." Grace's tears continued falling, but something shifted in her expression. "You're serious. Completely. I know I've done everything wrong up to this point. I've tested you, hurt you, failed to protect you from the fallout of my world. But I want to do better. I want to earn your trust properly this time. No games, no tests, just two broken people trying to build something real." Grace pulled back, studying his face. "If we do this, if I even consider this, you have to understand something. I won't be your project or your redemption arc. I'm not here to fix you or save you from yourself. I need you to do that work on your own." "I know. And I need time. Real time to process everything that's happened. The article, the testing, all of it. I can't just jump into this because you've decided you're ready for a relationship." "How much time do you need?" Grace smiled sadly. "I don't know. Maybe forever. Maybe I'll never be able to trust that this is real, and not another version of your test. Can you live with that uncertainty?" Sebastian thought about the question. Really thought about it. His whole life had been about control, about knowing outcomes before he made moves. Grace was asking him to leap without knowing where he'd land. "Yes," he said finally. "I can live with uncertainty if it means the possibility of you." Grace nodded slowly. "Okay, then here's what's going to happen. I'm taking my father away for a while. There's a treatment facility upstate that specializes in his condition. We'll be gone for at least a month, maybe longer. During that time, you're going to figure out who Sebastian Vale is without the armor. Go to therapy. Face the damage your parents did. Stop seeing the world as a series of transactions. And if I do all that, then maybe when I come back we can have coffee. Just coffee. And see if there's anything real between us when the crisis has passed and life is normal." Grace picked up her bag. "Don't call me. Don't send gifts. Don't try to control this, Sebastian. Let me come to you when I'm ready." She walked to the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I believe you when you say you love me. But love isn't enough. You need to love yourself enough to believe you deserve happiness. Until you do that, we don't have a chance." After she left, Sebastian stood in his empty penthouse, Grace's words echoing in the silence. She was right. He had spent so long building walls that he had forgotten who he was beneath them. His phone rang. His father calling from his estate in the Hamptons. Sebastian almost didn't answer, but something made him accept the call. "I heard about the scandal," Robert Vale said without preamble. "Messy business. You should have kept better control of the situation. Is that all you have to say? What else is there? You let emotions cloud your judgment. I taught you better than that." Sebastian felt something snap inside him. "No, Dad. You taught me to be paranoid and suspicious and incapable of trust. You taught me that everyone would betray me, so I should hurt them first. You taught me to be alone. I taught you to survive. You taught me to be miserable." Sebastian's voice shook with decades of repressed anger. "Mom left because you drove her away with your suspicion. You poisoned me against the world because you were too broken to heal yourself. And I've spent my entire adult life becoming you, and I hate it." The silence on the other end stretched for long seconds. When Robert finally spoke, his voice was different, older. "I know. I've known for years that I destroyed you the same way my father destroyed me. I told myself I was protecting you, but really, I was just making sure I wouldn't die alone." The confession hit Sebastian like a physical blow. "Dad, that girl, the one from the article, she seems different from the others." "She is. Then don't make my mistakes, Sebastian. Don't choose your armor over your heart. It's a cold comfort when you're old and everyone around you is there for your money." His father hung up, leaving Sebastian alone with the realization that his entire worldview had been built on the fears of a broken man who had poisoned his son rather than face his own demons. Grace was right. He needed to do the work. The next morning, Sebastian made an appointment with a therapist. It was the first honest thing he had done for himself in 20 years. And somewhere upstate, Grace sat beside her father's hospital bed, holding his hand and wondering if she had just walked away from something real or saved herself from another beautiful lie. 6 weeks passed like a slow awakening. Sebastian sat in Dr. Sarah Chen's office every Tuesday and Thursday, unpacking decades of damage one painful session at a time. The first few weeks had been brutal, facing the reality that his father's teachings had been trauma disguised as wisdom, that his mother's abandonment had carved a wound so deep he had spent his life ensuring no one could cut him that way again. "You've built your identity around not needing anyone," Dr. Chen said during their 8th session. "But humans are wired for connection. Denying that doesn't make you strong. It just makes you lonely." Grace said something similar. "Grace sounds wise." Dr. Chen set down her notepad. "Are you doing this work for her or for yourself?" Sebastian considered the question honestly. "Both. I want to deserve her, but I also want to stop feeling like I'm at war with everyone I meet. I'm tired of seeing betrayal in every interaction." That's good self-awareness. Now the hard part is learning to sit with vulnerability without weaponizing it or testing people's loyalty. The work was excruciating. Sebastian had to confront the reality that his tests hadn't been about discovering truth. They had been about confirming his father's poisonous worldview, creating the betrayals he feared so he could say he had been right to trust no one. He started making changes, small at first. He donated anonymously to causes Grace cared about, not to impress her, but because her values had opened his eyes to suffering he had ignored. He reached out to former business partners he had destroyed and made amends where possible. He started having real conversations with his employees, learning their names, their stories, treating them as humans rather than resources. His father called once during those 6 weeks. The conversation was brief, awkward, but Robert Vale said something that stuck with Sebastian. "I'm proud of you for doing what I never could, breaking the cycle." It was the closest to an apology Sebastian would ever get, and somehow, it was enough. Meanwhile, upstate at the Riverside Treatment Center, Grace was doing her own work. Her father's condition had stabilized remarkably. The doctors called it a minor miracle. Thomas called it borrowed time and was determined to use it wisely. "You're thinking about him again," Thomas said one afternoon as Grace stared out the window at the autumn leaves. "I'm always thinking about him. I hate that I'm always thinking about him." "Why do you hate it?" Grace turned to face her father. "Because it feels dangerous. Because every time I let myself believe Sebastian might be genuine, I remember that he tested me like I was an experiment, that he comes from a world where I'll always be the help, that his life is going to be full of people like Victoria, who will always see me as a threat to eliminate." Thomas patted the bed beside him, and Grace sat down. "Baby girl, I'm not going to be around much longer, borrowed time or not. Before I go, I need to tell you something important. Dad, don't. Listen." His voice was firm, despite his weakness. "You've spent your whole life taking care of me, sacrificing your dreams to pay my medical bills. You dropped out of college. You work yourself to exhaustion. You've never once complained. But I need you to understand something. My illness is not your responsibility. My life is not more valuable than yours." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "You're my father. And you're my daughter, which means your happiness matters more to me than my survival." Thomas squeezed her hand. "That man, Sebastian, he hurt you. But he also did something no one else could. He gave me time to say goodbye properly. That matters. What you do with your feelings for him is your choice. But don't run from them because you're afraid. You've taught me that courage means showing up even when you're scared. What if I'm not enough for his world? What if he's not enough for yours? Thomas smiled. You're brilliant, compassionate, and stronger than anyone I've ever known. You're not marrying his world, Grace. You're choosing whether to build a new one with him. There's a difference. That night, Grace lay awake thinking about Sebastian, about the morning after his test when he had looked ashamed, about the way he had shown up at the hospital without being asked, about the raw honesty in his voice when he said he loved her, about the fact that he had honored her request for space, not sending a single message in 6 weeks. She picked up her phone and stared at his contact information. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she set the phone down. Not yet. She needed to be certain. 3 more weeks passed. Thomas's condition began to decline again despite the treatments. The doctors prepared Grace for the inevitable. She spent her days reading to him, playing his favorite music, telling him stories about her childhood when he had been healthy and whole. I'm not afraid of dying, Thomas said one evening as the sun set over the mountains. I'm afraid of leaving you alone. I won't be alone, Dad. I have friends. I have my life. You know what I mean? Thomas's eyes held hers. Call him, Grace. At least give him a chance to prove himself. You'll regret it if you don't. Maybe I'll regret it if I do. Then you'll regret it with your heart intact. That's better than regretting it because you were too afraid to try. That night, Grace finally called Sebastian. He answered on the first ring, as though he had been waiting by the phone for 9 weeks. Grace. His voice was rough with emotion and sleep. It was 3 a.m. Is everything okay? Is it your father? He's declining. They say it could be days or weeks, but the end is coming. Grace's voice broke. I shouldn't have called. I don't know why I called. I'm glad you did. How are you holding up? I'm not. I thought I was prepared for this, but I'm not. She was crying now, unable to hold it back. I keep thinking about all the time I wasted working instead of being with him. All the moments I can't get back. Grace, listen to me. Your father knows you love him. Every sacrifice you made was an expression of that love. He knows. They talked until dawn about nothing and everything. Sebastian told her about therapy, about confronting his father, about the work he was doing. Grace told him about her fears, her grief, about the way her father kept telling her to forgive Sebastian and try. He sounds like a remarkable man, Sebastian said quietly. He is. He's the best person I've ever known. I'd like to meet him properly. When you're ready. If you're ready. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Tomorrow. Come tomorrow. I think my father would like that. And I think I would too. Sebastian arrived at Riverside Treatment Center the next afternoon, his arms full of books. First editions of classics Thomas had mentioned loving, volumes Grace had said her father read to her as a child. Not expensive gifts for show, but thoughtful ones chosen with care. Grace met him in the lobby, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Sebastian looked different, softer somehow, as though therapy had sanded down his sharp edges. Grace looked exhausted but steady, grief and strength braided together. Hi, she said softly. Hi. Sebastian wanted to pull her into his arms, but waited for her to make the first move. Grace stepped forward and hugged him, brief but real. She smelled like hospital soap and autumn air and home. Thank you for coming. Thank you for calling. Thomas Morgan was awake when they entered his room. His breathing labored, but his eyes bright. He studied Sebastian with the sharp assessment of a father, protecting his daughter even in his final days. Mr. Vale, I've heard a lot about you, Mr. Morgan. It's an honor to finally meet you. Properly? Sebastian set the books on the table beside the bed. Grace mentioned you loved Hemingway and Steinbeck. I thought you might enjoy these editions. Thomas picked up The Old Man and the Sea, running his fingers over the leather binding. First edition, 1952, worth a small fortune, worth having someone appreciate them. Money is just paper, Mr. Morgan. Stories are immortal. Thomas smiled. You've learned some things. I'm trying to. Grace, baby, could you give us a few minutes? I'd like to talk to Sebastian alone. Grace looked between them, concerned, but nodded. After she left, Thomas fixed Sebastian with an intense stare that reminded him uncomfortably of his own father. "I'm dying, Mr. Vale, so I'll be direct. Do you love my daughter?" "Yes, sir. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." "That's not good enough. Love is easy. Commitment is hard. Grace deserves someone who will fight for her every day, not just when it's convenient or romantic. She deserves someone who sees her as an equal partner, not a prize to be won." "I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you come from a world that will try to make her small. Trophy wife, pretty accessory, the maid who married up. Can you protect her from that? More importantly, will you support her when she protects herself?" Sebastian met Thomas's gaze steadily. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes. My instincts are damaged, and I'm still learning how to be someone worthy of her. But I promise that I see her, Mr. Morgan, not as a maid or a project or a redemption arc. I see Grace, brilliant and complicated and stronger than anyone I've ever known. And if she'll give me the chance, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good answer. Now here's the hard part. I need you to promise me something, and I need you to mean it. Anything. If Grace decides she doesn't want this, if she chooses to walk away from you, you let her go. You don't use money or power or guilt to keep her. You love her enough to release her if that's what she needs. Can you promise me that?" The request cut deep because Sebastian knew it was exactly what he needed to hear. Control had been his armor for so long. Thomas was asking him to give it up completely. "I promise. If Grace walks away, I won't chase her. I'll respect her choice even if it destroys me. Then you have my blessing, for whatever that's worth from a dying man." "It's worth everything." When Grace returned, she found her father and Sebastian talking about books, about life, about the wisdom that comes from knowing your time is limited. She sat beside them, watching Sebastian treat her father with genuine respect and warmth, and felt something settle in her chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe broken people could heal each other instead of destroying each other. Maybe love was enough if both people were willing to do the work. Thomas died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep with Grace holding his hand. Sebastian was there too, having stayed at Grace's request, supporting her through the grief with quiet presence rather than empty platitudes. At the funeral, Grace gave a eulogy about a man who had taught her that integrity mattered more than wealth, that kindness was strength, and that loving someone meant wanting their happiness even when it was hard. Sebastian stood in the back, watching Grace honor her father with grace and strength, and understood that he was witnessing someone far braver than he had ever been. After the service, after the guests had left, and Grace had cried until she had no tears left, they sat together on a bench overlooking the cemetery. "What happens now?" Grace asked quietly. "That's up to you." She turned to face him. "My father gave you his blessing, didn't he?" "How did you know?" "Because he told me the same night. He said you promised to let me go if that's what I chose." Grace studied his face. That must have been hard for someone who needs control. It was terrifying. It still is. "Good." Grace took his hand, the first time she had initiated contact beyond that brief hug. "I need you to be scared sometimes, Sebastian. I need to know that this matters enough to frighten you, because it terrifies me too. Are you saying you want to try?" "I'm saying I want to have that coffee you offered, and then maybe dinner, and then we'll see where it goes. One day at a time. No tests, no games, just two people figuring out if they can build something real." Sebastian lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I can do one day at a time. I can do honest and scared and figuring it out together. There are going to be people who judge us. Victoria isn't the only one who will see me as the maid who trapped the billionaire. Then they can judge. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. You're the woman who showed me that goodness exists, that trust is possible, that I could be more than my father's legacy." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, exhausted from grief and hope in equal measure. "Don't make me regret this. I'll spend every day trying not to." They sat in silence as the sun set over the mountains, two broken people choosing to build something new from their shattered pieces. It wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, old wounds that reopened, tests they didn't plan but faced anyway. But for the first time in his life, Sebastian Vale believed in something beyond suspicion and control. He believed in grace. He believed in the possibility of becoming better. He believed that love without conditions was real, because he had felt it from a dying man who had given his blessing to a stranger, and from a woman who had stayed when he was vulnerable. Not because she wanted something, but because her heart was built that way. Grace lifted her head and looked at him, brown eyes steady and honest. "Sebastian, yes? Thank you for coming when I called." "Thank you for calling." She kissed him then, soft and tentative, a beginning rather than a conclusion. When they pulled apart, Grace smiled through her tears. "Coffee tomorrow?" "Coffee tomorrow," Sebastian agreed. "And the day after that, and every day you'll let me." 6 months later, they were still having coffee and dinner and building a life that belonged to neither of their old worlds, but to something entirely new. Sebastian had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Vale Industries, focusing instead on philanthropic work that Grace helped shape. Grace had returned to school, pursuing the education she had deferred, with Sebastian's support, but not his control. They fought sometimes. Old patterns resurfaced. Sebastian tested her trust in small ways without meaning to. Grace pulled away when things felt too good, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But they talked through it, went to couples therapy, learned to recognize their triggers and face them together. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. On the anniversary of Thomas Morgan's death, Grace and Sebastian visited his grave. They brought flowers and stories and the news that Grace had been accepted to Columbia's literature program, that Sebastian had established a foundation in Thomas's name to help families afford medical care. "He'd be proud of you," Sebastian said quietly. "He'd be proud of both of us." Grace squeezed his hand. "We did the work, Sebastian. We chose each other every day and we did the work. Every day," Sebastian agreed. "No tests, no games. Just us." Grace smiled, the same warm smile that had first made Sebastian question everything he believed about human nature. Just us. They stood together in the fading light. Two people who had been broken by betrayal and healed by choosing trust, who had learned that the real test wasn't whether people would fail you, but whether you could be brave enough to believe in goodness when it appeared. Sebastian had spent his life looking for betrayal and finding it, but when he had finally stopped testing and started trusting, he had found something far more valuable. He had found grace in every sense of the word, and that made all the difference. Don't forget to like this video if it touched your heart. Subscribe for more inspiring stories and share to spread kindness. And comment below where you're watching from. The end.